Good evening, everyone. My name is Kristina Dooley, and I am the founder of Estrella Consulting, which is a full service college planning firm headquartered in Hudson, Ohio. And I have been an independent college counselor for 17 years, and I work with a team of other independent college counselors that support students around the United States as well as globally. And I'm really excited to be here again with Grown and Flown. Thank you to Lisa and Mary Dell for having me. It's always so much fun to come and share a little bit with parents about the process and specific topics, and to hopefully be able to shed some light on some of the things that are probably giving you just a bit of stress as you go through this process. And I know we always have a mix of parents coming from different parenting children of different ages. So you may have younger students. I know we had a couple questions from some middle school parents today. You may have some late high school students that you're still kind of trying to help them navigate this process of choosing courses, and that's okay. So whichever stage you're in, I hope that I'm able to provide you a little bit of information and guidance as you think about the scheduling process. I know that many of you are probably right now going through the scheduling process in there with your students, and they're probably either getting ready to schedule for next year or may have even already done that. Oftentimes there is a little bit of room, wiggle room to make changes to the classes once the student has submitted things. So if something comes up tonight and you are thinking, oh gosh, they already turned in their scheduling forms, please, by all means, have them chat with their school counselor. They're typically very willing to help them make some of the changes that they might need to their schedule. So without further ado, my topic tonight is actually, again, incredibly timely for all of you. But also, when the folks from Grown and Flown, when they asked me to speak on this topic, I let them know that, just interestingly enough, just 2 weeks ago, our team at Estrella Consulting, we actually just did a webinar with a panel of higher level admission folks from the University of Michigan, Ohio State, Rochester Institute of Technology, and the College of Worcester on this very topic, AP versus IB. And I know we're going to share a link to that webinar in the chat. And there's also a companion blog that we put together with it that has some terminology and also some differences between all these different options that you might have. So I think that'll be helpful to you after you're done listening to the things that I have to share this evening with you. So without further ado, I want to jump off. And one of the things I just do want to say is I'm going to address AP courses, IB program, and dual enrollment. I know there was a question that came up in the Facebook group about the AICE program, and that's not an area of expertise for me, but there is a resource that we'll share. We'll throw it into the chat that was put together by another consulting firm similar to mine, that has some information about the differences between those programs. So we'll touch on that in just a little bit, but that resource is there too. Okay, so jumping right in. So many of you are probably familiar with advanced placement courses. That's what AP stands for. The advanced placement courses are actually administered through the College Board, which are the people that administer the SAT. And the College Board AP courses, right now there's about 40 different classes that students can take that are AP level courses. I say that, however, your particular school district, your high school, may not offer not even near 40. They may offer 5, they may offer 10. And so the reason why I bring that up is the main question that we get often is, does the number of AP classes, if my student is taking AP classes, does the number that they take, does that impact their chances of admission somewhere? It's not so much the number that would matter. It's really the course rigor overall that your student is taking. So colleges, you've heard this, I know multiple times from the other grown and flown experts, that colleges are really looking at you and looking at your student, I should say, in the context of their school environment and what they've been offered. So if you're in a school that only has an offering of 10 AP classes available out of those 40 that exist, they're not going to say, okay, this student only took X number, maybe they took 6 or 7. They only took that, but then we have a school down the road that actually has 24 AP classes offered, and that student took 14. you can't compare them to one another, the students coming from those schools, because they haven't been offered the same things. And so just again, reiterating what's been said, I think many times in these sessions is your student is going to be evaluated in the context of their school environment. And that definitely comes into play with AP classes. If your school offers AP classes and your student chooses to take none, and the college notes, for example, maybe it's through their test scores or even just how they've done in school, comments from the teachers and their recommendations that the student could have been taking more challenging classes, that could hurt them. So if they choose not to take those AP classes, but they really should be taking more rigorous classes, that could be something that is harmful to them in the application review process, because the colleges really do want students to be challenging themselves with taking more rigorous classes to the in I would say in the amount that they can handle. So again, that is kind of how the AP classes are viewed. The AP curriculum is pretty standard. And so because it's standardized, what that means is that the colleges know what it means when they see AP US History or AP Gov or AP Bio. They know what's been taught in those classes. So it's an easy thing for them to be able to assess what kind of class that was. Um, a couple of things I want to just reference again. I just mentioned, the number of classes. In 2000 and I think it's 2013, it's been a bit of time, a long time. The University of North Carolina actually dipped their toe into a study on whether or not the number of AP courses that a student took in high school, if it mattered at all once they came to college. Does a student who took 16 AP classes, do they do well? Do they do better at the college level than a student who took 5 or 6? And what they found actually was that there was essentially a threshold where once students took, and I think the number was 6, once they took 6 AP classes, after that, it was kind of a wash in terms of how they performed. The students taking 8 or 9 were performing the same as the students who had 6. And so they decided that in their review process, they would only give students, they would basically say the max rigor value that you can be assigned in the review process is is going to be reached when you have 6 APs on your transcript. So it's a really interesting study. Has not been recreated, interestingly enough. However, I do reference that because when this study came out, many other colleges started to follow suit as well and said, you know what, we're not going to give bonus points for every AP class above X number that students took. So again, thinking of that particular study, we put a link to it in the chat so you can read that on your own. Again, it's outdated in terms of when it was presented, but I think it's still valuable. The other thing I want to mention is there's often questions about how will colleges award credit, if any, for a student who's taking AP classes. And the College Board actually has on their website a searchable tool that you can use, that you can look up colleges and you can actually see what kinds of credit they might be awarding for AP scores. So we'll throw a link to that in the chat as well. It's a really useful tool if if your student is already thinking of some colleges, maybe they've already applied to some schools, they can go on there and they can see what the scores that they might get. One thing I do want to just mention that was asked in the Grown and Flown group, one of the questions that came up was, what if my student takes AP classes but does not take the AP exam? Will that hurt them? And the answer is technically no, it will not, because one thing to consider is many AP classes, first of all, are taken as in the senior year. Certainly there are some throughout the 4 years, but many students are taking AP classes as seniors, so those scores would not even be available until after they've graduated. However, there are many schools. I mentioned we just had this webinar, and the representative from the Ohio State University, for example, she said they don't even look at the scores at all. Even if students submit them in the process, they're not looking at AP scores. Partially, there's some issues with that. One is not all students are required to sit for an AP exam. So the admission readers can't assume that the student had the ability to take the exam, took it, and then did poorly on it. They may not even have taken it. I actually, it's been a long time, but I took several AP courses in high school and did not take a single AP exam. It was not something that was done in my high school. And so for reasons of access, students, obviously there's a fee for AP exams. So they don't typically use AP scores as the end all be all when they're reviewing your applications. If a student has gotten fours or fives, my professional opinion is I would include those on the application. Threes, if it's a school that you've done some research and you see that threes are a score that they would find to be um, a good result on an AP exam. There are some colleges where a three is not considered a good result. So just keeping that in mind. Okay, so moving on to IB real quickly. And again, I do want to say I see some questions about comparing the different ones. I will get into that in a minute. I just want to do a couple of basic things about the different types of courses first. So with IB, IB stands for International Baccalaureate. It is a global program. It's taught throughout the world. It has a very standard curriculum. The colleges, when they see someone has done the IB diploma program, they know what the student has done. Though the program, typically the courses in that, many of them have a deep research aspect to them, a lot of group work, a lot of very just a little bit more intense in terms of the rigor of the courses. And so I'll just answer right now the question of should they do IB or AP. A lot of that'll come down to whether or not your school even offers both. There are not a ton of schools that offer both options for students. My recommendation is that if a student is able to do the full IB diploma program, that would be, I think, would be a great option. However, I do understand that sometimes students are not able to do a full IB diploma program and they can just take some classes in the IB program. If that's the case, one of the things I would recommend, and this came up in the group as well, a couple people asked about where do you put information where you want to explain something like the student has chosen not to take those classes, for example, maybe not the full diploma program. On the common application, you will see that there is the additional information section, and you can absolutely have your student write something to include in that section. I would also ask the school counselor to reference that in their counselor letter, because coming from them, obviously, I had a student last year, for example, who did not do she transferred schools as a sophomore. She entered an IB diploma school. She would not have been able to complete the full diploma program, but she chose to take IB courses. So they basically put something together that she explained in her additional information section. The counselor's letter almost mirrored what she wrote. So again, aligning on that with the school counselor is really important to explain why you're not doing the full diploma program. The other piece with IB that I want to just reference is that if your student is taking IB courses, many colleges don't view standard level SL as being rigorous enough for that for what they're looking for in terms of that coursework coming in. So the students should be taking higher level HL classes for it to count towards rigor in the college review. So just something I do have students sometimes who say, well, I could take the SL class, but they're much better served if they take the HL level class, higher level class. Okay, now shifting to dual enrollment. Now this is the question that's come up. This was the title of this chat tonight was, okay, AP or dual enrollment? What do we do? Do we take the AP classes or does the student enroll in one of the college classes? So this is really dependent on the college in terms of how they would view it. The vast majority of colleges, and I will even say, even in the webinar that I referenced that we just hosted, each of the admission officers that were there, and it included obviously big flagship schools, private selective colleges, all of them to a person agreed that they view them very similarly. AP and dual enrollment, they said that they would look at them and say they're both rigorous, they're both challenging, and so they would view them equally. I'm going to put a little asterisk because I have been in sessions where individual colleges have noted that they do not feel that way. I can actually give one concrete example. Case Western Reserve University has in many workshops will say that they very much prefer the AP courses over the dual enrollment. Here's why. and this is why I assume other colleges may also feel the same, is that the AP I mentioned is a very standard curriculum across every school that's doing it. They have a standard set of things that they cover. The test is standard versus a dual enrollment course. Depending on where the student is taking it and whether it, for example, is it being taught by a high school teacher in the class in this high school setting, a college level course being taught by the high school teacher, which happens, that is actually very common, or is it a actual college class on a college campus? And if so, which college? Some of those things actually do come into play in terms of their consideration of what they would consider to be rigorous or not. And again, comparing AP to that dual enrollment. So my piece of advice for you is when you go on visits, or if you're not physically visiting, you can also, and I think this is probably common in this group, but my recommendation is to have your student reach out to their region, to the admission officer who works with students from your area and ask them and say, I am faced with this decision. Can you please be honest with me? What would you view as being more rigorous and would be more favorable in your eyes when you're reviewing a transcript? And so again, vast majority will tell you they're even, but on occasion there will be some who will say one over the other. One of the things that I think is very, very important to hear if you're thinking of enrolling your child in a dual enrollment class, something that most families don't realize is that that dual enrollment class, it's a college level class, yes, but it is a college class, which means your child is beginning their college transcript at that moment. So how they do in that class carries with them, those are their very first college grades. So you know your child knows themselves, and whether or not a college level class would be something that they could successfully complete with a solid grade. We use the example often. We had a student who was applying to some BSMD programs, and she did some dual enrollment science-based classes in high school and did average, very average, because they're college level courses, and she was a high school student. That was her starting GPA in college for these courses. So you can imagine as she's applying to these programs and also looking at medical school because she wanted BSMD, but as you can imagine, you have to be very, very competitive in terms of GPA for BSMD programs. So she ultimately was applying to medical programs while she was in undergrad. And that was harmful for her to have those grades on her transcript as a college student. So keep that in mind. It is the official start of their college transcript. So that goes with them. So I always want to note that to people. Okay, a couple of other things, and then I'll jump into some of the questions. I see some of you put some questions in here. I do want to mention that there are many colleges that do not accept credits for AP scores, for example, or dual enrollment credits. We can throw in the chat a quote it's a snippet taken directly from Harvard's website that says they do not they don't use them, they won't give you credits for it. You'll find that many selective schools will not award you credit or will not let students pass out of a class with these advanced placement, dual enrollment credits, those kinds of things, because they want those students to be doing those courses on their campus with their faculty under their purview. And so that's an important thing for you all to look at as you're looking at schools. Is your student putting in all this work for all these dual enrollment credits or AP courses to get the scores on the APs? And it doesn't matter. It doesn't count towards anything. So they've just spent a lot of time and energy trying to do really well in those. It's not for nothing. It's great for them to do that. But if you're hoping it's to cut off some time in college or some credits, it may not be the case. So again, you really need to look at the policies. This one, I literally, you can Google dual enrollment policy and the name of the school, and you'll find whether or not, or even AP credit policy, and you'll be able to find the credit policies really quickly. If there's a school and you cannot find it, again, have your student send a message to them and say, I'm looking for your policy on this. The schools that do award credits, typically for APs, I mentioned earlier, it's almost always that most schools will award credits for threes, fours, and fives. The selective schools, it's fours and fives. So if your child has some AP classes they've taken as a freshman, sophomore, or junior, and they have those scores ready to go, you can actually wait until after the student has decided which college they're going to go to and send all of the scores at one time, because they won't have their senior year AP scores until the summer, till usually July. So just hold off. You don't need to send those into the school when they're applying, because again, the student can self-report AP scores on their application, but you don't need to send anything in at that moment. You can wait until they've decided where they're going to go, and then you can log into the College Board account and send all the scores at one point in time. Sending again, only depending on the school, threes, fours, and fives, or just fours and fives. So, and then with IB, the same thing. Many colleges will give some kind of credit, or sometimes let students pass out of classes if the student has a 6 or above on the IB exams. So one thing I will mention is I just said that there are some schools that won't award you anything. There are also some schools, I mentioned that we had Rochester Institute of Technology on our webinar. There are some schools that they have a little caveat where they'll say, but if a student gets a 5 on AP Calc, we will award them something. So there are some really specific things like that. I actually believe MIT does the same for AP Calc. There's some that will do that for very high level courses if you get a 5. So again, you hear this a lot on these Grow and Flow webinars, but it does depend on the individual institution. So just something to put your child to work doing some research on the policies for the schools that they're really considering. A couple of other things. One of the questions that our students will ask us all the time when they're scheduling, do I take the advanced classes, so like an AP course or dual enrollment, do I take those and risk getting a B, or should I stick with my traditional college prep classes and get the A? We do a webinar each summer on behind the curtain of selective college admissions, and we have a link to the recording of that we can throw in the chat as well. But our panelists who we had that were from some pretty selective colleges, including Middlebury, Dartmouth, we've had Vanderbilt, Georgia Tech, and Rick Clark, who's one of the senior admission people at Georgia Tech. He always says it. I think it's funny because he says the same thing all the time. He says, well, we want you to take the harder classes and get the better grade, which is not the answer that the kids want. They want one or the other. So yes, AP classes typically have a rigor bump in the GPA. So if a student has a B in an AP class, they could still be getting a similar type of GPA as if they were taking a traditional college level class, or I'm sorry, college prep class, and getting an A. But in the eyes of the colleges, they really do want to see students taking rigorous classes. I believe, I'm speaking from my opinion, is that I believe that they would want to see a student taking a more challenging class and getting a B in it than just skating by with an A in a much easier class than really what they should be in. So one of the other things that I'll mention is with APs, there's a lot of myths out there in terms of, well, my student will take the class, and why bother taking the test, because they're not going to get a 3, 4, or 5 on the test, and they won't be able to do that. We have a link to the score distribution section on the College Board website, actually, which is interesting. You can actually go in and you can see how many kids get 3s, 4s, or 5s on the exams. Depending on the class, my suggestion for you is maybe don't share this with your child if you think it's going to scare them, if it's a class that they're already nervous about. But what they will notice is that a lot of the schools, or I'm sorry, a lot of the AP exams, students, more than half of the students taking them are getting 3s, 4s, or 5s on the exam. So their chances are actually pretty good if they're interested in those classes. So again, you can kind of see a little bit about how that works. A couple pieces of advice, and then I'll dig into the questions that are here. One of our panelists on that webinar I mentioned, our person from College of Worcester, she had a really good point, and I hadn't thought of this, but many high schools have finally started removing test scores from transcripts. Your students' test scores on ACT, SAT, APs should not be on their transcripts, actually. Those are owned by your student, not by the school. However, some schools still do put them on there. So they'll put the AP scores on the student's transcript, which then gets sent to the colleges. Her advice was make sure your student, if they see that, goes into the counselor and asks for them to be removed, to have all of their scores removed from the transcript, especially if the student has gotten a 1 or a 2, for example, on an AP exam. You can't unsee that. And so make sure that your student goes into it takes a look at their transcript. If scores are on there, they should come off. All the score reporting should be done by your student, not on the transcript. So that was advice from her because obviously she's seen maybe some of those 1s and 2s. The other thing that the University of Michigan director of admission brought up, which was also a really good point, is now because schools are test optional, oftentimes students will check on their common application, their main application for admission, that they want to apply test optional. And that suppresses the testing section of the reader, the admission reader's screen. So when they're reviewing the application, they cannot see anything that's on the testing information. So if scores have been sent in from the college, if you've sent in some scores, they can't see that. What happens often is students want to apply test optional, ACT or SAT test optional, but they would like for the schools to see that they got a 5 on AP US history, for example, but they can't see that because they put test optional. So one of the things that they mentioned was students can use the additional information section on the application to indicate that. They can put in there that they received these scores on an AP test during a freshman, sophomore, or junior year. They can do that. Again, some colleges don't care about AP test scores when they're reviewing anyway. But for those schools like the University of Michigan, she mentioned she'd like to know that if a student had a 4 or 5 on an AP test, but they're test optional. So she's okay with them not sharing their ACT or SAT scores, but she would like to know if they want to share those 4s and 5s. So they can use the additional information section to do that. And then let me see. I think those are all the tips or all the general piece of advice. Let me go through these questions because there's some really good ones. I was looking at them as they're coming in. So and if you have others, please, by all means, throw them into the chat and I will do my very best to answer those for you. So, okay. So I answered the question, Bethany, about AP versus dual enrollment. Again, typically, generally viewed very similarly by colleges, with the caveat I mentioned the Case Western example. I think it is worth an ask at specifically more selective schools. For most large public institutions, they're viewed very similarly, very similarly because they're considered rigorous both. Do schools know that certain counties know there are options choosing high school? Point being with the colleges, if parents had the option between an IB and a non-IB school, is it really judged within each high school, like you just said? I'm not so sure I understand the question, Meredith. I think if you're asking when students are choosing a high school, if they should be choosing a school that offers an IB program versus the school that offers the AICE program, are they really judged within each high school? Yes, they really are. I live in a community that has both a strong public school system, a Catholic high school, and a independent boarding school, and the students from those 3 schools are viewed very differently by in terms of the review process. And I'm near Case Western, I'm not far, so I'll use that again as an example. When Case Western is reviewing applicants from those 3 schools, they are not saying, okay, this student who attends this high school, which is 1 mile literally from the private school down the street, they're not comparing them equally. They're not looking at them and saying, oh, but this family chose to do this or they chose to do this. They're really just saying, you are in this school. Let's see what you've taken advantage of in that particular school setting. So the school profile is incredibly important for everyone on here. If you have never laid eyes on your high school profile, that's your homework for tonight, is to find it. It should be available on your high school or your district's website. If it is not there, I would encourage you to ask your high school if you could have a copy of the school profile. It's essentially typically a one-page document that shows the admission reviewer a, a summary of your school. It tells them things like what percentage of schools go on to college, what colleges might those students be going to, what are the AP, sometimes AP score distribution is on there, what percentage of students have above a 4.0. I'm sure maybe in these sessions, a discussion has come up about things like grade inflation. So the profile is incredibly important because your student might be doing something that is it's unique to because of the context of their school. So my high school here, for example, we have a program as for freshmen that is on honors biology and honors English class that is team taught, and it has an interesting name. It's not just called honors English and honors biology, different name. So if someone's looking at the transcript, they would not necessarily know, oh, that's honors English and honors biology. But the profile outlines it and says, this is what that class is. So then the reader can say, oh, okay, we get it. That's a rigorous class. If they didn't have that context in the profile, they may just look at that and say, oh, that's what is that class? So again, get your eyes on your high school's profile so you know what it goes along with the transcript. When your school counselor sends the transcript, that profile goes with it. So to give, again, the reader some context. Let's see. Yes, Mary, good question about the Cambridge. The Cambridge program, similar to AICE, IB. The only difference is that with Cambridge and AICE, this is the blog post I shared that was posted in there about weighing the differences between AICE, IB, and dual enrollment. One of the things that mentions in there, and I find this to be true, is because these, like the Cambridge and the AICE programs, are typically completed by the end of 10th grade. If they don't continue on, which it sounds like your student would be continuing on taking probably more selective classes like AP and dual enrollment, then it is considered rigorous. If they don't continue on with that trajectory of rigorous classes, it almost negates the fact that they did that program in 9th and 10th grade because they want to see, again, continued trajectory of rigor. Um, let's see, if a school caps the points awarded for AP classes at 6 or whatever that is, just taking additional. Oh, I see the question. Okay. Yes. So this question about if a school caps a college, if a college caps the number that they actually consider rigorous, if they say, or they say you've met our highest level of rigor because you've taken 6 AP classes, is it worth it to take additional AP classes? Yes, because you will never know what that number is. There are no schools no colleges that publish and say this is how many AP classes we want students to take. The unfortunate thing, there's not transparency about that. Just truly that one study was it. And again, that hasn't been replicated because I imagine they probably had a lot of people pointing to that afterwards and saying, this is, I've done my 6. And so I assume they still actually use that, like I said earlier, but you wouldn't know if, for example, um, does Auburn or Tulane or University of Connecticut, how many do they consider to be rigorous? We don't know. They don't publish that information anywhere. So I would say the students should continue taking AP courses that they enjoy as well. There may be a question in here. I'm not all the way through the scrolling here, but I'll answer this question that wasn't asked necessarily because I think it's important. Um, we get the question sometimes, what if a student really, musicians are a good example. A musician who wants to continue taking or being in the jazz band or orchestra or something like that, and if they continue with that, it would mean they'd have to forego maybe another AP class as a senior or junior, for example. But they're pursuing their passion. They're doing something that brings them joy, that they love, that it's probably a lifelong thing for them. What's the choice there? And this question actually came up on our webinar, and I tend to tell students that that is a time when they really need to assess, does making that choice to choose something that's making them happy and excited about learning, because that is learning, even though it is an artistic avenue. It's definitely learning. Um, and on the webinar, the representative from the College of Worcester, she said, yes, I think they should continue those kinds of things because that, again, those are things that are important to them. The representative from Rochester Institute of Technology said, well, taking orchestra is not going to be the thing that an admission office looks at and says, okay, that is a reason why we would admit them to our school, but taking AP Calculus could be. And he is coming from a school that is very STEM heavy. So he pointed that out. He said that. He said, you have to really look at the context of the colleges that the student is applying to. I've mentioned this a couple of times, but that additional information section on the Common Application, as well as the essay, to be honest, are wonderful places for students to give context. So the person from Worcester said if somebody just explained to them in that additional information section that they chose this knowing that it was a less rigorous academic based class, but chose the music class instead because it was something that was going to again bring them personal joy, aid in their mental health, whatever that was. She loved that. And she said, yes, that's okay because that's what sometimes we want students to be able to do that. So again, knowing the kinds of schools you're applying to, ask the question. You can ask the admission officers that kind of question as well. And just keeping in mind, and I'm a big proponent of students not giving up on something that they really love doing, and that again will be a lifelong thing for a class, one thing. And you do have opportunities to explain some of those decisions on the application. There's another thing that is new-ish in the last few years in the application process that's I probably been mentioned in some in a few of these grown and flown sessions, but there's something called Glimpse, which a glimpse video is a 90-second video that a student can send to a college. And this year, I think we just had an update from Glimpse. They said 250 different colleges are now accepting these Glimpse videos. They're unedited. The student has to record it in one shot. They can't use like CapCut or something to edit them. And it's 90 seconds for them to be real and share a little bit more about themselves that might not be obvious everywhere else in their application. I love them. I love the ones my students have done. They get to share. Sometimes it might be something like this, like, hey, you might notice on my application, I chose this over this. Here's why. And then they pick up their violin and they play their violin in the video. So think about how moving that would be to somebody thinking, gosh, yeah, they've made the right choice with that. So if you haven't heard of Glimpse, that's something, especially if you've got younger 9th through 11th graders, check it out for next year because I think it's going to be something we're going to see a lot more of. Okay, a couple more questions I think in here. Okay. For high school profile, what happens for brand new schools? Brand new schools have they have a profile too. Schools actually yes, they will have just the basic information. Sometimes they have forward-thinking information on there, though, too, projecting like this is what our plans are, and that happens. There are schools. I actually, I was a director of admission at a school that wasn't a new school, but it merged with another school, ultimately becoming a new school. So we had to do that. We had to put together a brand new school profile. But we knew what classes we were offering, but there were some aspirational things that we had, and we shared that on there. So absolutely, a new high school would have a school profile too. That's a really good question. Let's see, middle schooler is in school. They allow one AP per year. Is it better to continue in that school or go to another competitive high school which has no limits? That's a really great question. I think it's Nita or Nita. That's a really great question. My question would be, what are the reasons why they're limiting it to one AP per year? Are there other things that the students are doing or taking that they want the students to focus on? Or is it a matter of the pressure, do they not want them to be taking more than one because they feel like it's too much? One side note I'll make is if a student's interested in taking an AP class and they have a strong interest in it because they feel like they could take the AP class, take the exam and get some college credits or something like that, which is oftentimes why students will think of taking AP classes in addition to it being on their transcript. Students can actually, this is different than like the IB, students can take an AP exam without having taken the class. And students do that all the time. They'll do self-study, or they'll do something like I've had students who've done an AP language exam because they've used Duolingo or something like that, and they are able to sit for the AP exam. You don't have to be in the course. So, but I would again want, let's say it's, oh, good context. They're saying it's better since most kids will be taking the max rigor the high school allows. So, mm, so are you asking if the middle school only allows one AP? They're offering APs in middle school, or in high school they have one per year in high school? I think that's how I read your question originally, was that they are only allowed to take one AP per year in high school. I'll circle back to that one if you want to answer it. Does a second transcript go out from the high school to the colleges applied to after graduation, even if they've accepted an admission offer? 100%. The transcript actually, there are actually 3 times that a transcript will go to a college. The first is with the application during that fall time of senior year. The high school will send the transcript. The second, which has become much more common, is many colleges request mid-year grades. So classes, grades up to the middle of the senior year. How have they done so far in senior year? So if you have students who are saying senior year doesn't matter, I can take it easy, not true. Partially because you might have been hearing a little bit about the fact that many colleges now are deferring students from the early rounds of admission to a regular decision round. So they say, you know what, it's not that we don't think you're a good fit for us. We want to just wait and see what the rest of the applicant pool looks like in the regular decision round. And we want to check in and see how you're doing this year as a senior. And that can be the detriment of many students, because they do just bomb senior year, or they say, I don't really care, I can get all B's, when they've been an all A student, for example. So the counselor will send that at that point. And then yes, after graduation, even though a student pays a deposit to go to a college and you're officially enrolled, you're not actually officially enrolled until this college gets your final transcript that shows that you've actually matriculated from the high school that you attended. So they will get a final transcript. That's also important because, same thing, if your student doesn't do well the second half of the school year, and what was a transcript of A's and B's is now a transcript with a couple of C's on it, that actually can matter. All admission offers, you'll notice this when students get an offer of admission, which now comes electronically through a portal of some sort. There is always something on there that says this offer is contingent upon successful completion completion of high school in the manner in which you presented in your application. I paraphrase, but that's a typical verbiage, is what you graduate with should be what we saw earlier on. If it's not, they absolutely can rescind offers of admission. All you have to you can look up online reasons why people have had their offers of admission rescinded, but it can happen because of grades for sure. Okay, our county doesn't put out school profile per high school made public. You should be able to request it. It should be a public document, the high school profile. So I would push back on that if there's any interest. It's interesting when schools don't have it on their website. Most high schools do. Most high schools will have it publicly available. And to be honest, if they don't send it with the high school transcript, some colleges will have to go and try to find that. So if it's not easy to be found, that could be hurtful as well to your student. I would say the vast majority of colleges keep profiles on record. So within their database system, they have updated school profiles that are sent by someone at the school has sent them an updated school profile, and then they refer back to that for every student they're reviewing from that high school. So if you're not finding it publicly available, I wouldn't use the ratings on things like niche or great schools. I would go to get your actual high school profile, and see what that looks like. One thing I will say is that high school profiles, you can certainly also look at other district profiles if you would like to kind of see what other schools have on theirs. But again, keeping in mind your student isn't going to be compared to school B and C down the street. They're really just going to be compared with the students within their own school. So, okay, let's see. Middle schooler continues in current school and stays for high school. limits imposed on the number of AP, whereas another high school would not limit it. Yeah, that's interesting that they would limit the number of APs in the high school. To one. I think that's an interesting thing. I haven't heard of that before, so I don't have an answer or a solution to that. But there must be a reason why they're doing that. I don't know, but that if that were my child and that were a policy for my child's high school, I would absolutely have my child note that in the additional information section on their common application that they were only allowed to be taking the one per year. That should be on the school profile, actually. If that is a policy of the high school, they should be sharing that on the school profile. We only allow our students to do this, and that's it. That way, the reader on the college side says, okay, it's understandable why this student only has this number of, but every student from that school will also have only that same number. So again, in the context of their school, they're not going to be getting a knockdown because they only have that many. Everyone else in that same high school would only have that many. So um, let's see. Let me just look real quickly. I think, um, okay. Give me just 1 second. I just want to make sure that I answered all the ones that came in on the Grown and Flown group before. Someone did ask a question in the Grown and Flown group about a specific program, and they were looking at aviation programs and what matters in terms of, for example, world history versus a STEM major. And I would lean absolutely towards looking at your major, looking at what the student is interested in doing. They should certainly colleges want to see students taking courses outside of their academic area of interest, but they also, if they're interested in a STEM field of some sort, they should definitely be looking at taking some of the higher level STEM classes. And there are some schools that actually will require something like for engineering. I mentioned Rochester Institute of Technology, they want students to have calculus. So there are some schools where you have to have certain things, or physics, for example. Rochester Institute of Technology requires physics. And if your high school doesn't have the physics class, that might be a case where the student is able to do a dual enrollment class. I have a student right now actually who is taking a physics class through dual enrollment with Kent State University because they did not have it in his high school, and he is applying for engineering programs and he needed it. So yes, good question, Bethany. So yes, you're able to see a school's profile. You should be able to, you should have access to it as a parent in that district, or as a community member even. Anybody can ask for a high school profile. It should be public information. And if it's not publicly available on the website, it may be in your student's portal if they use something like Naviance or School Links or something like that. They may have it posted in there. So definitely see if you can get your hands on it, just so that you know, not so that you can critique it. I should say that. I should have said that when I first said that. It's not so that you can redline it and say, oh, they're saying this or they're saying that. There is purpose and reasoning that goes into the information they decide to include on that or not. And the high school counselors, they go through, there's lots of trainings actually every year on updating school profiles and what should you include, what should you not include that makes it beneficial to the college admission reviewer. So just trust that they're putting things on there. But if there's something very glaring that you're like, why aren't they referencing this? Just ask. Don't, I would say don't dictate, but you could certainly ask and say, why is this piece not included? And they may have a great answer. It may be that they address it individually on the student recommendations, that they, for those kids who are involved in that program, they reference it during the recommendation process. So again, don't assume the worst, just ask, and they, I'm sure, can give you an explanation. If a student wants to self-study and take an AP exam, there's certain AP classes that are more widely accepted across most colleges and universities. Not necessarily. They're on that AP, the earlier, and we can post it again, maybe the College Board searchable tool that you can use to look for what colleges offer what credit for what APs and what scores. It's a searchable tool on there. That might be a good resource for you. I will say one of the questions we get, and actually one that had just came up recently, was AP pre-calculus, as an example, is a newish AP. And that the jury is still out on whether colleges are going to look at that as a rigorous class or not. And the answer I've heard on many panels and things like that from admission folks is that it is an AP level class, so it is an advanced class. Um, it's a intro level calc though, so it's not going to be viewed obviously the same as calculus, but they'll need that if they want to take, if they can't go right up into calculus, then maybe their stepping stone is AP pre-calc. So again, the jury's out on that class. And there are some, even there's some question, I know sometimes families say, is something like any of the AP art classes, are those valuable? Well, for sure. If you have a student who's looking at something in the arts, absolutely. Those are definitely going to be classes that the students will, or the colleges would want to see. Okay, you guys are asking excellent questions. I'm here for as long as you need me to be. We might get cut? I don't know if go to phone will cut me off. Do school counselors have to approve if a student gets to appear or for the exam without taking the course? I don't believe so. No, they're taken independently. So I believe that you can register for them directly through the College Board, but don't quote me on that. I would actually, as opposed to trying to just register and take it, I would actually go into your school counselor and say, this is what I'd like to do. If your student wants to take it independently, because they may be able to help you through that process much more simply than if you were trying to do it on your own. So I would probably just be very honest with them and say, my student is going to self-study, and there's lots of self-study tools online that you can find for free through, like Khan Academy has a lot of AP study to anything that would be like an AP study tool online. Even if you're not taking the class, you can still do that. You could do practice exams. Most, for example, national test prep companies, many of them offer free AP practice exams that students can take. So they could take one and see how they would do before they jump into it. So that might be an option for them as well. Let's see. My senior wrote the additional information that he took the most rigorous coursework, the exception of AP Advanced Chem, and the reason was due to scheduling conflict. So he took Latin in its place. He mentioned all the information. I hope that it helped his application. I bet it did. Amanda, I bet it did, because the reader would have no idea about that. They would have no, probably, they don't have the time and bandwidth to, that sounds bad, that they don't have the time to think about these things. But when they're reviewing, there's some statistic out there that the average application gets about 5 to 8 minutes of eyes on it from an admission reader. That's not very long. So the easier you can make it on them by giving them the context and just bluntly stating it. You don't have to include fluff, can be very direct. Here's why we did this, and we want you to know that. And so I think, Amanda, that was probably very smart for you to do that, to have that in the additional information section. Then that's why that's there, is really because the colleges know there's some things that are just not, they're not easy to just pull out from the transcript, that to just make, understandable. Foreign language a core subject in college, is it better to get it done in high school as a dual enrollment course? I'll answer the second part of that question. To get it done in high school as a dual enrollment course, not necessarily. It depends on what your high school offers. If they don't offer foreign language, then yes, you could definitely do it through a dual enrollment course. But I would say probably the vast majority of high schools have foreign language in their course roster. I will say, and I actually, maybe I should have mentioned this earlier. You guys can I'm joining a lot of you because I actually have eighth grade triplets. And so they are getting ready. They've just done their high school course scheduling. So all these, decades of advice I've been giving to families over for this period of time, now having to take my own advice, with my own kids. And when we went to their high school transition night to learn about the courses and things, one of the things that was shared was that the students needed basically X number of classes in these different areas. And essentially, they cited 4 core areas: English, science, history, and math. Nothing was mentioned about foreign language. However, there are many colleges that either strongly recommend or require that students come in with 2 or 3 years of a foreign language. So my high school there was no mention of this as something that because it's not a graduation requirement, it falls under the electives actually. And there's no mention that colleges would really want to see a foreign language. So the students walked away from that saying, well, we don't have to take the foreign language in high school because it's not required. We can graduate without it. But in reality, if they are applying to, I mentioned I'm in Ohio, if they're applying to The Ohio State University, you better believe that they need to have at least 2 years of a foreign language and probably 3. It is actually posted on their website. So any college that your student's looking at, go on and look at the course requirements. Some of them are recommendations, some of them are requirements. So if they say that something is recommended, in your mind, switch that word to strongly recommended, not just recommended, because if they're putting it on there as a recommendation, they really want to see it. So foreign language, it is something you need to take in high school. Now that I'm rereading your question, it appears your question is, do they need to take it as a college student? Is it a class in college? Totally depends on the major that they're in. Some college majors require a foreign language, but most do not. Most college majors do not require a foreign language at all. So, but again, I think that students should be doing a language through high school, and ASL does count. I should mention that. Colleges do count that as a world language. So if your student's doing sign language, they can also do that. Okay. In another session, course Lush said many colleges strongly recommend 4 years of a foreign language, highly selective schools, 100%. If you're looking, and that is here's the phenomenon that's happened. Many of you might be in districts where foreign language actually begins in middle school. So I mentioned my children. My children are in Spanish this year. So many kids are getting their foreign language start in middle school. So the expectation is if they're going to have 4 years of a foreign language, they're only doing 3 in high school. So many of the selective colleges say, yeah, they should be. We're only expecting them to have 3 years in high school of a foreign language. And then the 4th year would have been their middle school. So yeah, that is a very accurate comment that came in another session. Okay. If the foreign language instruction at the high school is not great, is it better to take dual enrollment elsewhere? Son is finishing 2nd year of Spanish, doesn't want to continue because the teacher in class isn't great. Yes, I've had students who've done that. It depends on your district, though. Sometimes the district will not allow you to do dual enrollment if the class is offered at your high school. The workaround sometimes is they'll do it in the summer. Some students will take a summer college level language course through a local community college, for example, to get a high school credit for it. So you could do that. That is an option as well. Um, let's see, so freshman, sophomore in high school, how do you know where you might want to go and then get your clear idea? Oh, that's a very good question, Noah and Daniel. How do you know how do you know where to go? How do you get started? Um, That is a really, and again, I'm going to be going through that next year with my kids with the search process starting early, and it has started earlier and earlier. Most of you probably are feeling that this is a much earlier window of time than we had probably experienced if you went on to college, where we started as late juniors or early senior year, right, looking for schools. So it is hard because if you're not sure what kind of school you might be looking at, you may not know, should I be aiming for the stars and taking all these more challenging classes? It's a similar kind of question as the test optional piece. When students say, well, I don't know if I'm going to be applying to schools that are test optional or they're going to require test scores. So should I take the test or not take the test? What we advise students is you should be essentially going through the motions that that testing is required. So we tell students you should be sitting for the tests, and let's make an assumption that you may apply to schools that require it, because the unfortunate reality, and you probably have all heard this, is there are schools that are going back to requiring testing. So when it comes to rigor of classes, the only thing I can think of that where it's imperative that you really need to have the right trajectory is if your child at any chance at all that they might be going into something like engineering, nursing, something that is very math and science heavy, they should just be on a pathway of taking more rigorous math and science classes. The goal should be for them to get up to pre-calculus at a minimum. If they're engineering, they should be getting up to calculus by the time they're done with high school. And then for math or for science classes, they absolutely have to have biology, chemistry, physics. And so again, it's better to shoot for they're going to need those things than having regrets that they didn't take them. There are students who sometimes between junior and senior year, I just mentioned foreign language, taking a class at a local community college. You can do that for those kinds of classes too, but keep in mind a dual enrollment class, for example, a calculus class coming from a local community college is not going to have the same cachet as maybe an AP calculus class or even an honors calculus class in the high school. Even though it's a college level class, it may not have that same kind of rigor associated with it because as I mentioned earlier, dual enrollment, the reason why Case Western feels like that isn't at the same level as AP is it's an unknown in terms of the quality of the coursework and what they're actually doing. So I know that wasn't a direct answer, but um, yeah, that's a hard it's hard to know what to predict. I always my favorite thing to do is to pull out my handy magic 8 ball with my students and say, "Let's ask the magic 8 ball what's gonna happen next," because there's so many uncertainties. So, it was wonderful to be here with all of you. I know that was rapid fire, and I hope a lot of that was helpful information. Please use the Grown and Flown Facebook group. Ask us questions. The experts in there, that's we're happy to answer questions. There are no silly questions at all. And if you're thinking it and wondering it, others probably are as well. So wonderful to be here with everybody tonight and enjoy the process with your teens. It's a great one. Thanks.